Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Richard and I had been married for 5 years when we decided it was time to expand our family. We first met during a deposition at an insurance company where I worked. Richard was the lead attorney representing the plaintiff, and I was part of the defense team. His sharp mind and relentless ambition made it clear right away that he was on a fast track to partnership and millions on the path to justice. Although I considered myself a capable lawyer, I never thought I was at his level, so I was genuinely surprised when he reached out to me after the case was over. Our relationship blossomed quickly, growing over dinners, late-night cocktails, and various social events. Richard was witty and charismatic, holding my attention with every conversation. Our physical chemistry was just as strong. He was an attentive and inventive lover, and I responded with equal passion. Soon we were married and living in a luxurious gated community among those who had made it. We bought a massive 4-bedroom single-story home, which seemed excessive for just the two of us, but we thought it would allow room to grow, maybe even hire a nanny if I returned to work after having children. Like many young couples with financial success, life seemed perfect. The only real issue we faced was Richard's demanding work schedule. While my job was a simple 9 to 5, Richard was always chasing the next big case to make partner at his firm. This left me with all the social obligations in our prestigious neighborhood, attending barbecues, wine tastings, and other events typical of our close-knit elite community. It was at one of these events that I grew closer to Mary, which eventually led me to meet her husband, Michael. Their relationship sparked my curiosity, and with time on my hands, especially during the last month of my pregnancy, I decided to get to know them better. I didn't hire a private investigator or anything dramatic like that. Instead, I simply became friends with Mary, who, like me, wasn't working at the time. She lived just a couple of houses away, and I felt drawn to their seemingly simple life. It was like a puzzle I wanted to solve. Michael was an accountant with his own small practice. Unlike other men in the neighborhood, who were always networking or flaunting their success, Michael seemed uninterested in expanding his business or forming new connections. He looked like a typical accountant, mid-40s, balding, a bit on the heavier side, but not excessively so. He didn't give the impression of ever being particularly athletic, more of a quiet, scholarly type. He often seemed a little out of place at social gatherings, especially since he didn't participate in typical male activities like golf or drinking. Around women, he was always polite and respectful, but never flirted or was overly friendly. Mary, on the other hand, was the complete opposite of her husband. She was stunning, lively, and flirtatious, with an energy that naturally drew people to her. At 37, she looked even younger, with a figure that caught attention, particularly her voluptuous curves and noticeably enhanced chest. Every movement she made exuded confidence and undeniable sensuality. Despite her flirtatious demeanor, Mary was fiercely loyal to Michael. I saw her lose her composure only twice, once when a group of men mocked Michael in her presence, and she quickly put them in their place, and another time when a well-known neighborhood playboy tried to hit on her. She made it clear right away that she wasn't someone to mess with. Mary let everyone know that her heart belonged only to Michael. Their love was so strong that it almost annoyed those of us who observed it from the outside. Strangely, Michael didn't seem to realize just how deeply Mary adored him. He treated her with kindness and respect, but didn't notice her fiery devotion the way we did. Maybe he had simply gotten used to it over the years and started taking it for granted. Despite their financial stability, they lived more modestly compared to others in our neighborhood. They had enough money to fit in, but they didn't flaunt it. Their cars were ordinary, and they avoided excessive luxury. No boats, no oversized TVs, no massive home renovations. They had a pleasant backyard with a pool, and their grill was functional but not fancy. I never heard Mary complain about money, even though she didn't wear the latest fashions or adorn herself with jewelry, aside from her wedding band, engagement ring, and a simple pair of gold earrings. It was clear that they had the means for extravagance, but they chose not to participate in the race for flashy wealth that characterized our community. Mary and Michael had 2 children, a 7-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter, both well-behaved and sweet. They hired a nanny to help with the kids and household chores, but Mary remained actively involved in raising them. Their family life seemed ideal in the best sense of the word. Despite living in an environment where material values played a significant role, they appeared genuinely happy without feeling the need to showcase their success. I had always known that Mary's son attended one of the most prestigious private schools, but it never seemed like anything special, especially since he was only 7. Mary handled his daily routines, dropping him off and picking him up. The boy's father was always busy with work, and when needed, a nanny would step in. At the time, I was 8 months pregnant and had taken a break from work. I had gotten used to taking short morning walks to stay active, but tried not to stray too far from home. One morning, during one of these walks, I ran into Mary as she was driving her son to school. We exchanged a few polite words, and I suggested we meet for coffee later. She already had a packed schedule, taking her son to school, going to the gym, and doing some shopping, but she promised to stop by for coffee around noon. I had a feeling something was bothering her, but I didn't expect that today would be the day she opened up. As it turned out, I was wrong. When Mary came by later, coffee in hand, our conversation naturally shifted to children and pregnancy. I casually asked if she and Michael were planning to expand their family. Her response caught me off guard. "That depends on Michael. I'll do whatever he wants. If he wants more children, we'll have them. If not, we won't." As she said this, I noticed her absent-mindedly twirling a small gold earring, a habit I'd seen before whenever she talked about her husband. It was clear that this was a painful topic for her. "But you should also have a say in this decision," I remarked. "We're not living in the 19th century. Michael can't force you to have a child." Mary chuckled softly, but there was a hint of unease in her laugh. "Michael would never do that. He's the kindest person, honestly. I couldn't find a better husband. He would never pressure me. It's just, I'm willing to do anything to make him happy. If that means having more children or not, as long as he's content." "Do you really love him that much?" I asked, surprised by her devotion. "Everyone can see how you treat him, like he's some rare treasure. You're always so attentive, but sometimes I feel like he doesn't fully appreciate everything you do for him." Mary twirled her earring again, a clear sign of her anxiety. "And I hope he never finds out," she muttered under her breath. Her words struck me as odd, so I pressed on. "You don't want him to know how much you care?" "It's complicated," she whispered almost inaudibly. "Let me ask you a question, Margaret. You're a lawyer, right? If I tell you something in confidence, do you have to keep it secret, like between a lawyer and a client?" "Yes," I replied, "but only if you officially hire me. Are you in some kind of trouble? Is Michael hurting you in any way?" She quickly shook her head. "No, nothing like that. I just need to share something, and I have to be sure no one else will ever know. How do I hire you?" "It's simple," I explained. "You just need to make a small payment, even something symbolic, and we can establish attorney-client privilege." Without hesitation, Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a $20 bill with a smile. "Consider yourself officially hired." Relaxing a bit, Joan leaned back and began her story. "I grew up in this neighborhood. My father was a roofer, but he spent half his earnings at the bar, so we were always living paycheck to paycheck. My mother worked as a hairdresser, but even with her income, we stayed at the lower end of middle class. Between my father's drinking, cheating, and constant fights, I'm honestly surprised I even finished school. After high school, I took some secretarial courses and got a job at a pretty awful agency. I mostly handled paperwork and filled in for employees on short-term contracts. That's when I met Michael. His secretary was going on maternity leave, and I was hired to temporarily replace her." "And when was this?" I asked, curious about the timeline. "About 14 years ago," she replied. "I was 25 then. By that time, I'd already had my share of fun and was starting to think about settling down. Back in those days, I admit I had big plans for a wealthy life. I wanted to marry rich, live with him for a few years, and then leave with enough money to live comfortably. Michael seemed like the perfect candidate. He was 33 at the time, 8 years older than me, and even more naive than he is now. I never considered him particularly wealthy, but he owned his own business, had a nice apartment in a decent area, and seemed to meet all the criteria of an ideal husband. After my work at his company ended, we started dating, and soon I moved in with him. A year later, we got married. Michael was sweet and always accommodating, and I was confident I could manage him as much as I needed to. He trusted me completely and didn't even ask for a prenuptial agreement. I wouldn't say I'm proud of being a gold digger, but I don't have any regrets about it either. So here I am, married for 13 years, and still content. We had a fairly typical engagement. The only condition I set before agreeing to marry was that I wanted us to have our own home, a real house we could call ours. Having lived my whole life in rented apartments, I wanted something permanent. We searched and eventually found the house we live in now. At first I thought the price was too high, but Michael insisted that we needed a spacious place, just in case we had kids. I didn't want children, but I didn't want to disappoint him before the wedding. The most pleasant part for me was that he didn't even blink at the cost, and had no problem adding my name to the deed. However, right before the wedding, something happened that seemed insignificant at the time, but later turned out to be a turning point in my life. What was it? Well, shortly after our engagement, Michael suggested having dinner with his old school friend. We went to a small restaurant, one of those cozy places that feels more like someone's warm family home than an ordinary eatery. The atmosphere was intimate, with touches of sophistication. When we arrived, Michael briefly spoke with the maitre d', mentioning the name of the person we were supposed to meet, and suddenly the mood shifted. We were led to the best table, and soon a bottle of premium wine was brought to our table as a complimentary gesture. The service was impeccable. 2 waiters were constantly nearby, making sure everything was perfect. When our dinner was almost over and Michael's friend still hadn't shown up, 2 burly men entered the restaurant, surveyed the room, and sat at some distance from us. One of them left the restaurant briefly and returned with 2 other men, one impeccably dressed about Michael's age, and the other much older. Michael stood up, embraced them, and introduced me to his old friend Oscar and his grandfather, Oscar Garcia. These 2 were nothing like Michael. When I asked him about them later, he simply said Oscar was an old school friend. Their visit was brief. The elder offered a short toast, wishing us all the best before the wedding, and they drank to our future. Oscar gave me a wedding gift, a stunning pair of diamond earrings, which I later found out were worth around $15,000. After a few hugs, they left. None of them came to the wedding, and I didn't see Oscar again for the next 2 years. Life went on in the usual whirlwind of wedding preparations, moving into the new house, buying furniture, and settling into married life. I soon forgot about that dinner entirely. Michael went to work every day, but he didn't seem particularly ambitious. I asked him a few times if he wanted to expand the business or take on more clients, but he was perfectly content with what he had. Money was never an issue. I didn't know how much he had, but whatever purchase came up, the price never seemed to bother him. So how was our married life? Let's just say we found our rhythm. Michael was kind, gentle, and incredibly sweet, but sometimes that's not enough in certain areas of a relationship. Before the wedding, I had been with a few men who enjoyed a bit more passion, something Michael never offered. To be honest, I missed it. At the time, I wasn't ready to leave the marriage, not until I knew for sure how much Michael was worth. But the desire for something more exciting remained. I wasn't about to pursue this desire at home, considering our nosy neighbors, so I signed up for a gym. I genuinely wanted to stay in shape, but I made sure to hire an attractive personal trainer. George, my trainer, was full of energy, putting everything into our workouts, and soon I began looking at him differently. He was half Italian, tall, with a body sculpted like marble. Before long, we began an affair, meeting in hotels a few times a week for passionate encounters. His stamina was incredible, giving me exactly the adrenaline rush I had been missing. Yes, I was cheating. Did Michael ever find out? No, he never did. He remained blissfully unaware, but the way things unfolded in the end was far worse than you can imagine. The whole situation fell apart in the most horrifying way. There was one time when Michael had to go on a business trip for a few days. George and I, taking advantage of his absence, planned to spend the night together at a hotel. It was something new for us. We'd never gone that far before. Usually, we would just carve out a couple of hours during the day when the opportunity arose. But this was supposed to be special. A whole night together. But honestly, I hardly remember anything from that evening. It's as if everything was shrouded in a haze, like we were drugged without even realizing it. The night passed in a blur, and then suddenly men burst into the room, harsh, brutal. They dragged us into a car by force and took us to some abandoned warehouse. I knew George was involved in something shady, maybe steroids, and I assumed that's what had landed us in trouble. I thought I was just an innocent bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. "You mean you were kidnapped?" I asked, feeling my stomach twist in horror. "What happened next? How did you get out of there? Did Michael find out?" She continued, her voice taking on a strange, almost emotionless tone, despite the terror in her story. The way she described it sent chills down my spine. "When the drugs started to wear off," she said, "I realized I was tied to a chair. My wrists and ankles were bound with bandages, probably to avoid leaving marks, and there were more bandages over my mouth so I couldn't scream. It was odd. They were careful not to leave a single bruise on me, but I didn't understand why. But they weren't so gentle with George. They cuffed him and hung him from a rope tied to the ceiling, right in front of me." She paused for a moment, as if gathering the strength to relive those memories again. Two men came in and tore George's shirt off, ripping it at the cuffs. They spread a plastic sheet beneath him and started beating him with chains. Thick, heavy chains. His wrists bled from the way the handcuffs dug into his skin. His screams, he screamed over and over. Her voice faltered for a moment, as if she could still hear those screams in her head. "The screams eventually stopped," she continued, her voice eerily calm. "I think he lost consciousness. His eyes were so swollen they were completely shut." Her hands trembled slightly as she took a deep breath. "Then they brought in a forklift. They threw him into a barrel, sealed it, and rolled it away." I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process the horrors she was describing. She paused for a moment before continuing. "After that, I blacked out. When I woke up, I was still tied to the chair. Across from me, in another chair, sat Oscar. He's a friend of Michael's. One of the men came up to me, removed the gag, and freed one of my hands. I just sat there, too stunned to react in any way. Oscar offered me a flask. I took a sip and coughed as the alcohol burned my throat. It was strong, but I needed it. The warehouse was freezing, and I wasn't dressed for the cold. The alcohol gave me a little warmth. Then Oscar spoke, his voice unsettlingly calm. "Mary, we need to talk, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that?" I nodded. What else could I do? Oscar asked, "Does Michael know about the man you're seeing?" "No," I replied. "I've been careful. Michael doesn't know anything." Then he asked if there was any chance I was pregnant by George. "No," I quickly assured him. "I'm on birth control. I'm not ready for kids." "And Michael knows about that?" Oscar's tone hadn't changed, but there was a new coldness in his eyes. "No," I whispered. "He doesn't." "Mary, do you really love your husband? Do you believe you can give him the happiness he deserves?" Without hesitation, she replied, "Yes, I love him, and I know I can make him happy." I was about to continue, but he raised his hand to stop me. "You may not realize it," he began slowly, "but your husband is one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. If he wanted to, he could be a brilliant writer or even a famous scientist. His financial acumen is unmatched, yet he runs a modest office with only a few clients." He paused briefly before adding, "Among his clients are my family, a few trusted friends, and some of our business partners. But there's another side, one more dangerous. Very powerful groups in this country also use his services. Michael is incredibly talented, but perhaps because of that, he has certain peculiarities. We accept that. All we want is his happiness. Many people care deeply about his well-being, and as you've seen today, some are willing to go to extreme lengths to ensure his happiness." His gaze narrowed as he continued. We believe you're part of that happiness. You can make him happy, can't you? I know I can, I said quietly. I love Michael deeply. Excellent. Let's be frank with each other. I speak with Michael often, and he's madly in love with you. He sees you as the perfect wife, the future mother of his children. I don't want that image shattered. We both know you're after his money, but what you don't understand is that his fortune is far greater than what you've seen. If you're planning to get close to him, know this. There are many people who won't let you touch him. They'll do whatever it takes to protect him. He shifted slightly in his chair. Soon, my people will make sure you return home safely. There's no need for Michael to know about this conversation. Leaning closer, he added, wait a month. When you're sure, stop taking the pills. Give Michael the family he's always dreamed of. Can you do that? Yes, I can, I whispered. Good, he said, his voice turning cold. I don't want to see you again. If we meet again, it will end badly for you. There are many ways to die, from a road accident to a botched robbery, and Michael will never know the truth. But before that, you'll experience a real nightmare. So don't give me a reason to interfere in your life again. And most importantly, don't do anything that could upset Michael. A menacing silence hung between us. I sat in a stupor, too stunned to say anything. Meanwhile, Mary seemed almost satisfied as she told her story. She finished. Michael never found out. I made sure of that. Since then, every day I do everything I can to make him happy, because my life depends on it. She paused before adding, a month later I received a package. Inside were these earrings. She pointed to the earrings she was wearing, and a card signed by Oscar. I wear them every day, so I never forget. Intrigued, I asked, what's the meaning behind these earrings? She carefully removed one and handed it to me. A small pendant hanging from it was an intricately crafted golden replica of a 55-gallon barrel, stunning in its detail. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.